Reese Witherspoon.
I don't know if this bit is going to work. I'm Jennifer Aniston. Welcome to the morning show.
Ooh, look at this. Well, we're going to get our intro eventually.
We'll get it down by the end of the season. We'll get it down. It's going to be. Our intro is going to be so good that somebody's going to take it, put it to some trap music, and it's going to become a TikTok sound.
Well, and in case you're confused, this is actually the coffee and tequila.
In case you don't know what the hell you're listening to, welcome to Coffee.
Well, it sounds like I don't even know what show I'm on right now.
You look so red. You look like you.
I was just so embarrassed by saying that.
Shoved the biggest stick up your ass and turned the dial up to 110 degrees.
Zachary, we cannot be saying the A
I
word.
forgot. Yeah, so Mondays are morning show days today. Welcome to Coffee and Tequila, the Monday morning show. Fridays are going to be our late show, and today's April 4th.
April 4th, so we might be finding you guys on your commute to your work on Monday morning. So just take a deep breath, and you're going to have a good day. Let me send you good energy.
Are you talking to them, or are you talking to yourself?
I'm talking to both of us, because tomorrow I'm also going to be going back and forth.
Yeah, we're recording this on a Sunday, so by the time you're listening to this, you should be at work right now.
I know. And speaking of work,
you just started too.
I did just start.
This episode is also kindly being sponsored by Helix Sleep, and we will let you know a little bit more about them a little bit later. And Brenda's over there sleeping in the corner. He's like, "You guys are liars. It is not the morning. It is actually very late at night, and it is my bedtime."
I know if you hear any snoring.
It's all Brendo. We used to always be Whitney snoring in our videos. We used to have her snores all over our videos.
So enjoy this snoring. It's additional ASMR. Today we'll be talking about feral children. And just so you know, we are not talking about Will Ferrell's children. Is that bad?
Is that an insensitive joke? I don't know. You're just going to do it.
I thought it was funny.
I thought it was a good joke. You got a joke. Good joke. We're talking about feral children today.
Because we talk about pop culture a lot. So I was like, we need to make sure.
Will Ferrell's children. We're bringing the informational portion to the late night portion. What did you know about feral children before I ever brought anything to you?
I did not know much about feral children. I had heard of Jeannie Wiley's case. Honestly, I think I've heard.
Where did you hear that?
You played something, probably in my sleep.
Probably a while ago. Then
no, but I hadn't known much about it until recently, and you started researching it for this, and then I've been very curious about it. A lot of it seems like feral children have been in history for a very long time, and they've been very reminiscent in folklore as well. And I don't know.
It's really interesting. I hate the term feral children though. Like I really don't like that, and I think it sounds like super disrespectful to these cases because it just like they're either called feral children or wild child. You know, it's always something like that kind of attached to there instead of like maybe neglected child or abused child. You know, it's I don't know. It leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I wanted to go back for a second to something you just said, though.
What?
You said, I might have heard it while I was sleeping or something like that. Do you... Does anything I ever listen to while I'm going to sleep ever go into your dreams?
I have asked you to stop listening to true crime while I'm sleeping because I will have nightmares. I will play it out in my head while I'm sleeping if you're listening to stuff like that.
I try to turn it down. I try to I listen to.
Now it's 90 Day Fiance stuff.
It's 90 Day Fiance. Never.
That's still a nightmare.
Do you ever have a nightmare about 90 Day Fiance?
It's not good.
He has started. He doesn't like listening to anything. He just wants to put on the fan the whole time we're sleeping. And so, But recently, you have started listening to this weird TikTok ASMR, and so. It'll just be like, oh my God, it's awful, it's awful. I woke up in like a startle one night because I heard like freak. I didn't know where it was coming from. I was like half asleep still, looking like throwing blankets over and could not find the phone. It was awful. So if you are listening to any of my true crime,
it started out with like a woman who she does her own like energy healing thing. And I really enjoyed it. And then she doesn't do it very often. But her thing is slightly ASMR. So I started following other ASMR people. And then I started playing them. But apparently they freaked.
I can't do that. I can't do that as I'm going to sleep.
But they're always on TikTok around like 10 to like 2 a.m.
I can never do that. No.
But one thing I did figure out about feral children that I did not know before starting to research this is that there's 3 different types. feral children who are confined, feral children who are isolated away from humans. You know, like they find themselves lost in the woods, and feral children who have animalistic qualities because they've been raised by animals or raised with animals.
That's primarily like the legend, isn't it? Is that a child who's away from society and is raised by wolves or like monkeys or something like that. A feral child, according to the Wikipedia definition. A feral child, also called wild child, is a young individual who has lived isolated from human contact from a very young age, and so has had little or no experience of human care, behavior, or human language. So, like, yeah, in stories and folklore and like our imagination, and anytime we think of something like that, we're thinking, they're being raised by wolves and stuff. But oftentimes,
it's like Mowgli or something, right?
Yeah. Like, but oftentimes, it really is just child neglect. It's the case that we're covering today is
it's them being like, I think, severed from human connection, really,
from human society and human connection. And as we all know that, as you're growing up, you have very formative years at the things you learn, right? And so if you're not learning those things in those years, it does like set you back developmentally pretty significantly, especially if you're not having any human contact, if you're not like learning social skills, if you're not having any stimulation. And the case we're talking about today is Jeannie Wiley, one of the most famous cases of like child neglect and one of the most famous like feral children, if we want to attach that term to it.
That's confinement. Isolation, animal, and it's confinement because she was confined away from humans,
Away from humans and yet so close to humans at the same time, right? Like she was locked. We were watching a movie called Mockingbird Don't Sing. It's a movie that was based on the Jeannie Wiley case, and it was so bad. It was so bad. I don't even think we finished the whole thing.
Editing, oh my gosh. It's like...
It's very like Lifetime movie of the week, but
no, it wasn't. Lifetime does much better.
But I wanted you to like see this, and I was hoping that he gets much more into movies than documentaries, and so I wanted to show him a movie that he'd get really into, and it just wasn't the one.
Yeah, we switched to the documentary.
But Jeannie Wiley is a person that I heard about a long time ago, probably when I was in high school. And I remember seeing her pictures and just like falling in love with her and this sweet little girl, and just being like so heartbroken by her story, and the book that we're going to cover today is by Russ Reimer and pretty much details the whole case. But like, there's been cases of like feral children throughout history,
and a lot of times, I would say most times I've seen while researching this, child neglect comes in it at some point. Like for some reason, a lot of these that I've looked up take place in Russia during like
really
around the same time. There was this one kid, Ivan Mushukov, who was a 6-year-old boy in Russia who ran away from his parents at 4 years old. So he already had some stuff. His mother and her boyfriend were alcoholics and abusive, and he ran away, and he started hanging out with wild dogs.
Was that a real case, or was that a confirmed case, or was that?
It's a case from 1998.
Because there have been hoaxes.
It's a case from 1998, and he would hang out with the wild dogs because they would show him warm places to sleep at the end of the night. And so the way they caught him is he was 6 years old, and they caught him and his pack with food, and they took him in. But he was like barking. He didn't verbalize, stuff like that. But because it was only 2 years, he was eventually able to verbalize, go to school normally, and now he serves in the Russian army. Oh, gosh. I just realized he serves in the Russian army.
Oh, goodness. Oh, we're not talking about that right now. That's not the agenda today.
But good for him to be able to move on.
To move on from that as much as he could. Absolutely. Yeah. Because, like, I remember, oh, goodness, when was this? 2005, maybe. I remember my mom used to have Oprah on all the time, right? And so I pretty much anything I would watch that she was watching, I fell in love with. So General Hospital, Oprah, any daytime TV. And so I remember watching Oprah one day after school, and they were highlighting this case of this girl named Danny. She was also called the girl in the window. And I guess neighbors had seen this little girl in the window, and she looked like underfed, like she looked like something was
emaciated.
Wrong. Yes, and it was this really rundown, dirty house, and somebody called like the police, and the police showed up, and when they went in there and they went to the back room, they said the house was filthy. There were cockroaches everywhere. There were trash everywhere, and they went to this back room, and there was this little girl, like in the corner, just like huddled up, and when she saw them, she got up, and like they describe it. I don't even know. I can't even picture this in my mind. And they describe it as a crab walk over to another corner. I can't even like picture that in my mind, what a crab walk would look like. But she was 6 years old, and so for the first 6 years of her life, she'd been like kept isolated in this house, never allowed to like have any interaction with the outside world. And not only that, and this was like the worst part of it, is that the mother just didn't do anything with her. The mother had her, left her there, and when she, gets older and starts moving, she just starts doing her own thing, and the mother like doesn't change her diaper for like weeks on end, or all of this extreme neglect. The mother doesn't teach her how to speak. The mother doesn't teach her like anything, nothing. And so she grows up isolated in this house, not learning anything from the one person that is in this house with her, and she, I guess, would be called and considered a feral child or a wild child. She did get put into a foster home and eventually adopted by this family, who did take care of her and raised her, and they have continued to raise her. I think the couple who adopted her eventually got divorced, but there was an article not too long ago
because she didn't trust female figures.
Well, that's not why they got divorced.
Well, no. But one reason she wasn't close to her adopted mother is that she didn't trust female figures
because of her mother.
Of her mother,
and her mother didn't even like realize that she like did anything wrong, or she denied that she ever did anything wrong. And there was an article a little bit ago. That's another case I've tried to keep up with because I really want to keep up with Danny's story and how she's doing. And she lives in a group home right now. She seems to be doing really well.
She's going to college, isn't she?
No. She's.
She graduated high school.
She's very developmentally. She never got on track with developmental milestones. She's developmentally challenged still, and so she lives in a group home and she's being taken care of. And her dad comes and visits her, and the article is about her dad coming to visit her for her birthday and taking her out to buy a toy. So a very sad story. But we're going to be covering Jeannie Wiley today, and that's an even sadder story. So if you're not into a sad story today, then
they're all very sad.
Yeah.
I just found out about the Austrian story of the man who kept his daughter locked up.
That's not a feral child, though.
No, but she did have 2 children that were considered that.
Yeah. This is another story for another day, though. We're not talking about that.
But I don't know. I was just traumatized by that. Okay.
Now it's time to tell you all a little bit about our sponsor for today's episode, Helix Sleep. Helix is a premium mattress and a box company that makes beds to fit your unique sleep style. Big thank you to Helix Sleep for sponsoring today's episode of Coffee and Tequila. We've had our mattress how long? 2 years we've had Helix mattresses.
2 years.
Starting 2 years.
Oh my gosh. I hate to break it. We got a mattress the other day. It was a freaking amazing. We took a 3-hour nap in the middle of the day as soon as we got the mattress in the house.
Man. So we got some a partial delivery of our things to this apartment because we're in an apartment for about 6 months, and we have been sleeping on the floor. It's been awful. And before we were sleeping on the floor, we were sleeping on my parents' mattress at my mom's house,
which is not
just not the greatest. I'm sorry, Mama. But we finally got our Helix mattress back, and it was just we both laid down on it, and we had so many things to do that day. We just fell asleep and woke up like 3 hours later.
Honestly, it was amazing. It's like heaven.
Fantastic nap.
And even still right now, like, it's my favorite place in this apartment. I'm not going to lie. It's my favorite place in this apartment.
Helix knows that everybody is different and everybody has their own unique needs. And so they've made a sleep quiz that'll match you with your perfect mattress based on your needs. I am an all-over sleeper. Alistair's more of a side sleeper. He likes a firm mattress. I like, more medium. We took the quiz together, and we got the Midnight Mattress, and that mattress, let me tell you, is something. And one of the best parts about Helix is that they deliver the mattress right to your door for free. It comes rolled up in a box and is super easy to set up yourself. And if it makes you nervous to buy something online that you haven't tried, Helix has a 100-night sleep trial, so you get more than 3 months to make sure that you absolutely love it. And if you don't, they'll pick it up for you and you'll get a full refund. If you or somebody you know is in need of a new mattress and you think Helix is something that sounds right for you, you can go to helixsleep.com/tequila. We got a new one? Helix.com/tequila. And you can get up to $200 off of your mattress and 2 free pillows. Primary source that we're going to be using today is Genie: A Scientific Tragedy. It's a book by Russ Reimer. The book is actually the team of scientists and doctors involved in Genie's case have pretty much shit on this book.
Really?
They don't like it, and any articles that he wrote, they didn't like any of those either. But this is like the book that I have found the most comprehensive to tell this story, and he wasn't really involved with any of the doctors or anything, so I don't know.
What's his relation to the story? Do you know?
He doesn't. I don't think he had a relation to.
He
the
just
story.
wanted to write about it?
I think he just wrote about it. Yeah. So I thought that would be a good one. There's also a dissertation by one of the linguists involved in the case, Susan Curtis. So I'll reference that a couple times, and then the Wikipedia page for anything that like that got my simple-mindedness triggered, and I couldn't I needed it simplified. I went to the Wikipedia page and just took whatever was simplified there. But primarily, I'm using this book here. I went through the whole damn book to find this one.
And just so you'll know, he did a deep dive into this. I did not. So
did.
I will be asking questions.
This is the interview right now.
I did research on feral children, but not anything specific for Genie Wiley.
Yeah, it's okay. I'll lead this one. So Genie's mother, Irene, was born, and do you want to guess where she was born?
Texas?
Altus, Oklahoma.
No.
Genie's mother, Irene Wiley, was born in Altus, Oklahoma. She was raised by two sets of parents, basically, her normal parents, and then she had a mama and a dada. It's just another set of parents who basically raised her father.
Yeah.
And it seems like, from all accounts, from everything that I could find, it's really hard. It's really hard finding a whole family biography that goes way back then, especially to Altus, Oklahoma. I'm sure there's not a lot of family trees being kept.
I mean, I tried to look up the father, and that took me nowhere.
Hardly anywhere. Yeah, there's not a lot of documents going back that far. But it seems like she had a pretty okay home life, right? Like her dad had a really good job, and there's one story that she remembers that they were working outside, or they were doing something, and they saw men going by with some pails, with some little buckets, and she was like, well, where are they going? And they were going to the soup kitchen. And so her mom had to explain to her that they were lucky enough not to have to go to the soup kitchen. But she wasn't really close to her mother either, so I guess that kind of plays into her own relationship with her own daughter a little bit.
Generational trauma.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. She says her mother was a little bit stern and unloving, which is very of the time, right? Like parents, feelings. You have a feel. What is that?
That seems very Altus, Oklahoma.
It does feel very Altus, Oklahoma. Yeah. So when she was a child, though, so the handle of a ringer washer, you know what that is?
I do not know.
Okay,
what that
so you
is.
put the clothes in, and it's it's like a really old way to wash clothes, and they
so they just crank it,
and it goes through the little.
It's one of those boxes.
I think you have it in your head. I do think you have it in your head. Anyway, the handle of that hit her in the head, and that is partially a cause for part of her blindness. She also had cataracts that developed over time. So basically, she was 90% blind in her left eye, totally blind in her right eye.
I didn't know that, but I know it was exacerbated by her later husband.
Oh yeah, because of all the beatings and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Well, so her family did leave Oklahoma at one point because the drought came through. There was a big drought in Oklahoma. This is very on point. That tracks. There was a drought in Oklahoma, so they left Oklahoma for California, looking for this big grand
so odd.
life.
It's the opposite now.
It's just what people do. No, and everybody's leaving California now. But back in the day, people were going to California to get their life up. But they never really. Their earnings were all in California. In Oklahoma, they sustained a pretty nice life. They weren't rich or anything, but they were okay. And in California, their means were just very, very limited. They were definitely living paycheck to paycheck. Parents were working very hard. They had to work. So Irene was in her early 20s when she met Clark Wiley. Clark was 20 years older than her, and she was working at a
crazy.
Yeah. That was one of the. So I read this case so many times that I didn't realize how old Clark Wiley was, and that I just saw a picture of him for the first time a week ago, and I was so surprised at how old he was because that's not how I pictured him in
your
my
head.
mind. Yeah, but Irene was in her early 20s when she met him. She was working at a drugstore, and he would come in to talk about horse racing with the pharmacist, and so eventually him and Irene started talking, and They struck up their relationship. They
Started going steady.
fell in love. They went steady. Clark pretty much grew up in foster homes because his mother ran a brothel and his father was nowhere to be found. He didn't have much formal schooling either, but apparently he was really, really good at math. And so that skill led him to becoming a machinist, and he worked in the aircraft industry. So he got a pretty good job, yeah, because he was just really good at math. Didn't have to have the schooling for it.
I remember reading that he didn't have a good relationship with his mother for a long time because she was absent, but then something happened, and he became almost obsessive with his mother.
I didn't see that anything happened, but he was very, very devoted to his mother. I didn't see any event that happened, but it seems that in his adult years, and his mother kind of would go back into his life trying to, I don't know, make amends, I guess, and trying to make
Be
up
better
for
mother.
being so absent. But
Maybe that was it. Is that once he got attention from her,
probably,
you
but
know,
he was very
something
devoted.
that he really, really craved.
He was very devoted to her, and she could do no wrong. They would argue all the time, but like she could do no wrong. And she spent a lot of her time, like she spent a lot of her money, like supporting him in his adult years until he got the machinist job. And then when he met Irene and they started having kids, she was always over there, like helping to take care of things, clean the house. Irene even said that her mother-in-law was a nuisance because she was always over there. So she was definitely trying to be a positive influence in their lives. Irene has said that Clark was very overprotective and that he was very controlling during the relationship. We're already leading there, right? And she said that her life ended basically on her wedding day. Who hasn't said that on their wedding day, right?
Shut up. Yeah, no, don't say that.
I know it's awful though. Really, it is awful for her. Like she was young, like 20 something, but when she married him, early 20s, and she's saying like this was the worst day of her life, and this pretty much ended her life. That's insane. So from here, it only got worse and worse either. So Irene pretty much came from a confining life, and she just went right back into one. You know, she was in the land of promise, California. She could have been a star. She was in Los Angeles. They were living in Los Angeles. This is where, you know, you go to be a movie star and you have big dreams, and her dreams are just cut, done. Clark,
Do we know what her dreams were?
I have not seen that. No, she seemed like she was a really private woman, but Clark did demand that they did not have any children. He did not want any kids. He was very adamant he did not want any children, and she became pregnant because they're probably not using protection, right? They're probably not using protection. They're probably not trying not to have kids. He's just like, woman, you don't get pregnant. You don't get pregnant, woman. It's
your problem.
It's your problem. You don't get pregnant. That's a you thing. Well, now we know it's two people thing. Late in the first pregnancy, though, like Clark beat Irene like within inches of her life. She went to the hospital, and it was so lucky that she ended up giving birth to, or maybe unlucky that she ended up giving birth to a daughter. Like, daughter came out. She hadn't been injured in this beating, but not so lucky because they bring this baby home. The baby's crying, and Clark could not stand the crying. He hated it. One of the reasons he didn't want kids is because they were noisy. He did not like noise. This is like a thing that keeps coming up and coming up and coming up. He had this weird aversion to noise, and babies cry, and so he took the baby.
Odd aversion to noise.
Yeah. I couldn't see if either he took the baby or Irene took the baby, because Irene was always trying to just settle his temper, right? So I couldn't figure out which one did it.
I read that he did, but either way, it's from his actions.
One of them put the baby in the garage to keep them from hearing the noise of crying, and the baby obviously died.
Got pneumonia, right?
Yeah, the baby got pneumonia is what Irene said, and it's pretty much the baby died of exposure because it was put out in the garage. It was probably cold, and the baby was 2 months old at this time.
Which I feel like is such a red flag right there for any services.
Well, they keep having kids. This should have been there. This should have been her reason to go. She should have been out of there. But I mean, you know, people stay in these sorts of relationships for
they get trapped.
They get trapped and they don't know how to leave. But this would have been her perfect opportunity. She'd have gone off. She'd have lived a life. The next baby also died, but it died from Rh blood poisoning. So this is basically nature now, basically saying you two do not have children. Do not have children. So Rh blood poisoning is apparently when the mother has Rh negative blood and the fetus has Rh positive. Even nature's saying they shouldn't have kids. So the baby died. And then they had a third job. And this is the one you were talking about. This is John. John miraculously lived through infancy, made it all the way into old age. He lived. He had a life.
But he had a lot of trauma.
Of course, so we talk a lot about Jeannie and her trauma, and John Wiley is often very much forgotten in this case.
And I read while I was obsessing over it when you were showing me the movies and everything. I read an article of his where he's off, in his older age, and he's like, yeah, people just forgot about me, and I just wanted to get away from everything. But I had a lot of trauma as a kid.
Yeah,
I was beaten. His dad would beat his testicles.
Well, we're getting there.
Am I stepping on your
toes?
He's
trying to give. He read the Wikipedia. He's speeding through the Wikipedia.
I did not. I read
the book. I'm gonna tell you what the book is. What's happening in the book. So he suffered a lot of neglect growing up, like in his early years. So he nearly was a feral child. Became a feral child. I want a new name for it. We should have come up with a new name for it because I hate calling them feral children. Neglected child. He was very neglected when he was growing up, and he started developing slower than normal. He wasn't hitting those milestones that you should be hitting, and it was getting so bad that Clark's mother came in, Grandma Wiley. I couldn't find her name. She came in and she took the child in with her, and the child pretty much lived with her for a little while. And as soon as the child started living with her, he started getting back on track. Yeah, and developing normally and hitting those milestones that he was supposed to hit. Irene gave birth to their fourth child. April 1957. A couple, he did not want to have kids, and they had 4 freaking kids, man. And
2 of which have already passed.
This is Jeannie. Yes, by now, both of those kids had passed. John is living, and then we have Jeannie, who was born in April 1957. And Jeannie was also born with Rh blood poisoning, but had a medical intervention, and she was saved. And she was taken into this house and also neglected. Guess what? Of course she was neglected. They were not gonna start giving her all of the treatment they didn't give any of the other kids, right? They've set a pattern now. In 1958, Clark's mother was taking John to get ice cream. This is like what completely set Clark off. So already I think that Clark had a lot of issues mentally. I think he had something was there undiagnosed, like sitting and bubbling beneath the surface, and it was going to blow at any time, and it only took this event for it to happen. So Clark's mother was taking their son John, his son John, to get ice cream, and a car hit her, and right in front of John, he was watching as his grandmother gets hit by a car, and the car just drags her body down the street, and he's watching this, and it turns out it was a drunk driver. A drunk driver did it, and he did get arrested. He got charged, but he got away with probation. So really no consequence. And this sent Clark into a tailspin. He could not handle this.
Really, if you think about it, Clark gets the worst sentence.
Clark gets a worse sentence?
Yeah, because the drunk driver gets away.
Oh, yeah,
Clark
absolutely.
Has to go back to that
But
family.
Clark's a monster, so I'm not giving any sympathy to Clark. Sorry about it.
Wait, which one?
Clark, the father.
Oh, sorry, no, John. John gets a worse sentence.
We have a Clark sympathizer over here.
No, we don't. But John gets a worse sentence,
Well, they all do. All 3 of them do. Jeannie, Irene, and John. Clark was just, by all accounts, overcome by his fury at the injustice. He feels like the world completely turned his back on them and didn't give any justice to his dead mother. So he was very depressed, but this depression went way beyond grief, and he was getting to the point of pure madness. Clark quit his job, moved his family into his mother's home. It's this little yellow house. Have you seen the house?
Yeah, you showed me the house.
Very tiny house, very little California home. It's yellow.
2 bedrooms.
2 bedrooms. So the house had 2 bedrooms, and the house was in Temple City, California. And he kept his mother's room exactly as she had it, and he didn't allow anybody in his mother's room. Nobody could go in there. So that's one of the 2 bedrooms, just completely blocked off, and nobody can go in there because it was a shrine to her. This was his shrine to his mother. He had this, deep devotion to her, and so he's going to keep it completely pristine. I am the type of person who, I'm not Clark, but I am the type of person who will keep things pristine if I'm going through grief. So when we lost our animals, or when I remember when my first experience with death was my granny. And when she died, I went to her house and I was going through things and taking some stuff and put them in my suitcase, and I kept that stuff. I kept a stack of Post-its that she had, and I would not let those go for the longest time. They were postage. She'd never used them. They were in plastic. They had no meaning to her, but they were hers. So I was like, I kind of kept shrines like that, so I get that. He kept this whole room as a shrine to her. Clark, Irene, and John would all sleep in the living room. So all three of them would sleep in the living room, and this was because Clark would sleep in an easy chair. Irene and John would sleep on the floor. And Irene sometimes stated that Clark would sleep with a gun in his lap. So by this point, Clark is already abusive. We already know Clark is abusive, and now
he beats his wife. He beats his kids.
And now he's just like mad. He's just crazy and is sleeping with a gun in his lap. And like obviously they're scared to leave. Irene is scared to do anything. And then the second bedroom went to Jeannie, but it's not in a nice little girl gets her own room kind of way. This room had a baby's crib in it, and it had a potty chair. And this basically became Jeannie's prison cell for the next 13 years. So she was not allowed out. Clark hated the world for the injustice to his mother. He wanted to keep his family. His reasoning was that he wanted to keep his family away from the world that he thought would harm them.
Really? Yeah, because I was looking that up.
Yeah. He saw himself as their protector, and that he had to protect them at all costs.
Because in the movie, I remember Irene being like, "You told me that we could take her to a doctor after if she survives.
If she survives to 12, that we'll take her to the doctor."
Yeah.
Clark believed. So there was one point, I think, when Jeannie was like 2, that she went to the doctor, and they remarked that she might be slow. You know, she might
Probably developmentally slow because of how they're raising.
Most likely that, right? I think that's been a big question in the case throughout the whole case is like, was she already slow just naturally, or was her environment, did her environment make her slow?
Nature nurture?
Yeah, nature nurture. There you go. And so she was about 2, and the doctor told him that, and he went into a tailspin, and he said, the world is going to completely just abuse her and use her, and she's not safe in the world. And so he locked her away in this bedroom. He said that she's slow. The R word is used a lot in this book. So
it's used a lot in the documentary too. Like it's so weird to see just like actual like licensed therapists and psychologists like use our word very
crazy, willy-nilly too. But Jeannie, so he believed that Jeannie was not going to live past 12 years old. He said she's not going to live past 12, so we're going to put her in the room. Nobody's allowed to have contact with her. The mom can only go in there really in short spurts to go and feed her real quick, or you know, he really pretty much had charge over it. Nobody was really allowed to see her. She was supposed to be cut off from everybody because if she didn't live past 12. He didn't want anybody getting attached to her. He didn't want anything. How fucking sad. Like, cut her off because she was slow and because he didn't want anybody to get attached to her. And everybody suffers because of this. This is an excerpt from Susan Curtis's doctoral dissertation describing the conditions Jeannie was kept in. I figured I'd just like read it verbatim just so that y'all get exactly what the conditions were here. In the house, Jeannie was confined to a small bedroom harnessed in an infant's potty seat. Jeannie's father sewed the harness himself, unclad except for the harness. Jeannie was left to sit in that chair, unable to move anything but her fingers and hands, feet, and toes. Jeannie was left to sit, tied up, hour after hour, often into the night, day after day, month after month, year after year. At night, when Jeannie was not forgotten, she would be removed from her harness only to be placed in another restraining garment, a sleeping bag, which her father had fashioned to hold Jeannie's arms stationary, so I'm guessing down at her sides. In effect, it was a straitjacket. Therein constrained, Jeannie was put into an infant's crib with wire mesh sides and a wire mesh cover overhead. Caged by night, harnessed by day, Jeannie was left to somehow endure the hours and years of her life.
That's absolute torture.
It's just the image, the mental
you
picture.
You have no stimulus at all.
Okay. There was little for her to listen to. There was no TV or radio in the house. The father had an intolerance for noise, so what little conversation there was between family members and the rest of the house was kept at a low volume. Except for moments of anger when her father swore, Jeannie did not hear any language outside her door, and thus received practically no auditory stimulation of any kind. Hungry and forgotten, Jeannie would sometimes attract attention by making noise. Angered, her father would often beat her for doing so. In fact, there was a large piece of wood in the corner of the room, which her father used solely to beat her whenever she made any sound. Jeannie learned to keep silent and to suppress all vocalization. Occasionally, 2 plastic raincoats hung outside the closet in the room, and once in a while, Jeannie was allowed to play with them. 2 plastic raincoats. She was allowed to play with those occasionally. I'm assuming very rarely. In addition, Jeannie was sometimes given partly edited copies of the TV log with pictures her father considered too suggestive removed. So these would be like swimsuit models, anything on the TV log that looked like that. She was also given an occasional empty cottage cheese container, empty thread spools, and the like. These were Jeannie's toys. And together with the floor, her harness, and her body, they were her primary sources of visual and tactile stimulation. Jeannie's diet was equally limited. She was given baby foods, cereals, and occasional soft-boiled egg. Under pressure from the father to keep contact with Jeannie to a minimum, she was fed hurriedly, usually by having food just shoved into her mouth. Should Jeannie choke or spit out some of her food, she would have her face rubbed in it. Shove the food in her face, and if she happens to spit it back up, she gets her face rubbed in it. The visual that I get of her just strapped to this chair all day, staring at a wall. And that was her life, and she really never had a chance under this roof.
That's just so messed up.
So Clark didn't only abuse Jeannie, he also abused Irene and John pretty heavy also, nobody's surprised. Irene was blind, so she couldn't really do anything on her own. She couldn't even dial the phone for help, so she just lived in this house and just didn't. Because I guess that's always a question, is why doesn't an abuse victim leave, right? How is she going to leave? How is she going to take 2 kids and just leave?
It's not only being blind, it's also being financially reliant on somebody else, right?
Yes.
And I mean, I've seen a lot of women who stay in a relationship because they cannot financially leave because they do not control the money.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Her parents did live in the area. They lived 10 miles away.
Her parents?
Yeah, they lived in Los Angeles.
And her parents didn't want to.
I guess her parents didn't see her all that much. That's what is confusing to me, is did her parents not see her in this entire time? I don't believe that. I think her parents probably did see her.
So the parents not questioning what was going on.
Maybe they didn't question it. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they didn't see her in the house. Maybe, I don't know. Something was off. Something was obviously off. But it's just, there's too many factors for me to think that there weren't chances for her to get away, for somebody to come in and help her maybe. And I think there were some failings on other people as well. So Clark pretty much kept them isolated in the house day in and day out. John was allowed to leave to go to school and sometimes to play with the neighborhood kids. But at one point, John hit puberty. This is what you were kind of talking about earlier. Clark tied him to a chair and beat his testicles with a wooden board because Clark did not want John having children in the future. Fucking sick. And it was all under the name of he wanted to protect his family, right? This is such bullshit, man. From interviews, it seems that John was a little bit disappointed, going forward after all the press attention, that he was kind of forgotten. He was the forgotten, abused child that Clark...
He escaped as soon as he could.
Yeah.
He escaped as soon as all that stuff happened.
One of the quotes that John gave was, "I was left out in the field and no one came to my rescue. I am a living dead man." So he carried his own trauma into his adult life, and I would be curious to see how that manifested into his life. So let's go into the escape, right? This awful home life. Jeannie stays there for 13 years. And remember that Clark thought that Jeannie was going to die before 12 years old. And he told Irene that if she makes it to 12 years old,
they can have help.
You can go get her help. I will allow you to go get her help. 12 came and went. Did not happen. He completely went back on that. He said, no, you're not going to do that. So obviously he lied about it. When Jeannie was 13.
Do you think at this point he's he knows?
He's so stirred in his madness. This is a crazy man. This is not a sane.
You don't think he's doing it to protect himself at this point?
This is not. Oh, most likely. But I do think he was absolutely insane. He had to have been. So when Jeannie's 13, Irene and Clark get into this really, really big fight. It's a very violent fight, and Irene is demanding that Clark call her parents for her. She's like, "Call my parents, do it, or I'm going to leave you." because she can't do it herself. She can't call her parents herself. Finally, he gives it and he calls, and I'm guessing her parents come and get her is what I took from this. But Irene takes Jeannie and leaves. By this time, John is already 18 years old, so he's already out of the house. He just decides not to ever go home. He just never goes home.
The movie played that differently.
Yeah. I don't know.
It was like he went out for like food or something, and she told John, "I need to escape. Distract him."
That's the thing about like a story like this being like told over years and years and years is some things get changed, and so what I read is that John just doesn't go back home, But Irene takes Jeannie and she leaves, and Irene lived with her parents for about 3 weeks, and she has just come out of this really traumatic situation. She has this child this 13-year-old girl who is acting like she must have the mind of like less than a 1-year-old, right? Her mind must be developed less than a 1-year-old. And this is the crazy part. This is freaking wild to me. So one day Irene goes to find the office for the services for the blind, right? Because remember, she's like 90% blind in the left eye, right eye totally blind. So she goes to look for the services for the blind. She's holding her mom in one hand and like Jeannie in another, and she wanders not into the services for the blind office. She wanders into social services office. So the social services people see her and see this child that's with her, and they start asking questions because this child is, I think what it was described by some of the workers there is that Jeannie was standing with her arms outstretched, almost like she was holding a rail, or like a banister. So Jeannie looks like a girl who's like 6 years old, right? Jeannie is 13 years old, and so these people are asking questions, and they initially think that Jeannie has autism, but it's undiagnosed, and they're asking questions to Irene, and they're getting answers that, like, maybe Irene doesn't know that Jeannie is autistic, and they go back and get, like, the supervisor, and he's going to come out, and they start asking more questions, and they figure out that Jeannie is 13 years old, and so then it goes from a girl who may be autistic to... She looks abused. She's emaciated. She looks like she's been starved. She is just not something not right here. They don't take her at this point. Irene does get to go home. But,
really?
Yeah, but social service, because I mean, like, I don't know. I would assume that you could take her at that point, but
I would not.
I don't know how social services work.
I feel like immediately take that child into custody right now.
But they do. So she's not taken by social services then and there, but they do visit Irene at their house, at her mom's house, and they convince Irene that Jeannie needs help. And so they take Jeannie to the hospital. They take Irene to the hospital as well, in Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, and they start piecing together Jeannie's actual like state. They're piecing together not so much the background. This doesn't happen. The one thing that's really weird about this is Jeannie's background does not get revealed until like years later and across many years. It never gets really revealed at once because I think Irene is like hiding a lot of this.
So what we know is something that they don't know.
All they're able to start piecing together is that Jeannie is starved, Jeannie is neglected, Jeannie is 13 years old and looks like a 6-year-old. It ain't right. So Clark and Irene are arrested. They're arrested and charged with child abuse, and Irene pleads not guilty, saying she was basically forced into a role because of her husband's abuse, and her plea is accepted, and she's later released and is able to go and get counseling. This is actually because of the doctors. The doctors who end up working with Jeannie do go in, and they want Irene to remain in Jeannie's life. I guess there's some tie to her past. I don't exactly get that and why they would do that, but...
Do you think what do you think about that not guilty plea?
This is weird. This is like I have sympathy for Irene because it was an abusive situation. She's literally blind, dude. Like, she is blind. She wasn't able to like really defend herself all that much. But I have to imagine that over 18 years, if we're counting from when John was a baby, she didn't have a chance to do something. I don't know. I don't like going back and saying, well, why didn't she leave? Why didn't she just leave? So I'm giving her...
Also, the question is still there. Like,
yeah.
Because no matter what, you have a responsibility as a parent.
Yeah. But what I do think, and it is mentioned kind of in the book, is that she probably would have remained in that marriage and in that house had she not had kids. I do think it was her kids that kind of, or at least Jeannie, that kind of spurred her into leaving. that she needed to get out of there, right? Especially after 12 comes and goes and she's not allowed to get help for Jeannie.
I mean, some people love misery.
Yeah.
I mean, that's some things, and I know people in life
Yeah.
that just I feel like prefer to be miserable than anything else.
Well, I give Irene a lot of leeway here, right? I mean, I guess it's my responsibility to give her the leeway. I gotta give her the pass. You were blessed.
I don't know.
I look on it as like, you know, you were in an abusive situation yourself, and you did eventually get her out. Okay, I have a lot of problems. I do not like Irene. Fuck Irene. I do have problems with her later on, but here, give her a little bit of a pass here. Clark was supposed to be at that hearing, and he did not show up because that morning that he was supposed to show up, he killed himself in the house, and his son was, I think his son was even outside, you know, hanging out with some neighbor kids, and he left
A note.
yeah, he wanted to be hidden. So the thing with Clark, right, is that he wanted his family hidden away from the world, and all of a sudden they're like in the public eye. They're in the spotlight. You know, there's photographers carrying. You can look basically paparazzi photos that we would think of like the 2000s. We're seeing this back then. You know,
Yeah.
all these photographers hounding this couple, this Irene and Clark, about this the worst case of child abuse that the doctors have ever seen. You know, that is not what Clark Wiley wanted. So he killed himself. He shot himself, and he left a couple notes. He left one note for his son with $400 saying, don't take that shirt back. It's for my funeral. You know where my blue shirt is. Underwear in the hall closet. I love you. Goodbye and be good. And the other one for the police saying, my son is outside. And then one basically that seems like it's for the public, and it says, the world will never understand. Not shit for Irene and Jeannie. Nothing for them. Nothing for them. He doesn't leave them no money. He doesn't leave them nothing. He does leave his estate. He does have an estate.
Not even an apology.
Nothing. Nothing. He doesn't think he did anything wrong. He died. This is a man who died believing he did the right thing. Or at least in his mind, or at least what he admitted to the public is that he thinks he was doing the right thing. Whether that was in his mind as in his final moments that he knew he did wrong, we will never know. But basically left $400 for John, and then he did leave the house, and so the house was part of his estate, and the house was about $20,000. I don't know what that is in today's money. About $20,000, and that was decided by the state to be split up 3 ways between Jeannie, Irene, and John.
I think $20,000 was maybe because we just watched Miss Maisel. I think it was around 120, maybe thousand. I know it was at least above $100,000.
$20,000 in, well, this is 1970. Like,
Oh,
yeah, this is like
1970. Never mind.
Well,
I was still thinking 1957.
it's around that time, so it's about $146,000
Ooh,
for that house.
ooh,
It's
see,
the,
I
it's the
was
value of
close,
the
I
house,
was
but it's not
close.
money. This is not like money.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
the house. This is the value of the house. So it's like split 3 ways by the state. But like, you know, John never sees that. John basically takes that $400 and gets the hell out of California. He's done.
As soon as possible, get out of there.
Yeah, because he did feel like his mom was giving Jeannie all of the attention at this point, right? Like,
Yeah.
she was visiting Jeannie all the time. He was seeing everything that was happening with Jeannie, all the press situation around this, and everybody's talking about Jeannie as the abused child, not really giving. He was suffering from neglect too, you know?
Yeah.
Like, and he must have just been fucking spiraling. And where was the help for him? You know? He wasn't getting any help.
Everybody,
So-
which is interesting because you see this, you know, this one case, I would think that you would typically also look at the siblings, right?
Yeah.
And I understand that he's 18 and therefore maybe not under the purview of social services, but I don't know. I don't know if that's necessarily right, you know?
It's just he obviously couldn't take the pressure of it. So he took that $400 and left California and did not come back. He saw Jeannie and his mom maybe one other time, maybe a couple times since then, but he pretty much left and started his own life. So basically, how did years of isolation and neglect affect Jeannie? Is my big question in this section. Her mental age was that of a 13-month-old. Her fine motor skills were about the age of a 2-year-old. Jeannie was incontinent, couldn't chew solid food, couldn't really swallow. She was constantly drooling. She didn't show any emotion at all. She was completely emotionless. She did not express anything. And she had a ring of callus around her buttocks from sitting in that fucking chair and from being beat, right? And she had, this was the craziest part. She had nearly 2 complete sets of teeth because I guess she wasn't losing baby teeth.
Wow, like shark, like Rose.
That's what I'm like picturing in my mind. But I'm guessing she just didn't lose her baby teeth, and so her adult teeth grew in either over them or behind them. Her bone age matched an 11-year-old's. Her eyesight was fine, but she couldn't focus them on anything more than 10 feet away because the bedroom was about 10 feet, right? So that was the dimension of the room that she was in. She couldn't stand up or straighten any of her limbs. She had a bunny walk. I'm going to send you this bunny walk. This is what the doctors described as a bunny walk.
Was it this one?
Yeah.
Yeah, you sent it to me.
So that was pretty much how she walked. Later on in the Reimer book, it does say that I think Curtis describes it as her moving very slowly, as if she's moving through water all the time. She was very, very antisocial, obviously. But that seemed to be more when she had to have close contact with others. So she would walk up to strangers. This is over time, obviously, too, right? This is not just initially. We're talking about a little bit of time passing. She's in the hospital being taken care of. And she does walk up to strangers, but she doesn't like physical touch. And she doesn't seem to be able to differentiate people. So she would look at you and me, or even her mother. She didn't seem to be able to differentiate her mother from anybody else. I thought that was really interesting also. She really liked to explore her surroundings, but always seemed more interested in objects than people.
Because she doesn't interact with people.
She doesn't interact with people, and she loves objects.
Have that cottage cheese canister.
As we go forward, we learn that she absolutely adores containers and plastic pails and containers and buckets and all of that. She's in love with all of those things. So she's prompted to sit on her mom's lap one time, right, in the hospital, and she's very stiff and uncomfortable, and she wants to get up really quick. So she does not like the physical touch. She doesn't like the physical intimacy or anything.
Because the only physical stuff she's ever experienced is violence.
Yeah. So she doesn't really talk, but she is able to understand certain words, and a few of them are red, blue, green, brown, mother, walk and go, door, jewelry box. Who was at her room saying jewelry box 1,000 times? I don't fucking know. Bunny. And she could say stop it and no more as one word. Or not, each of those. Stop it would be one word and no more would be one word. So I'm guessing that's something she heard pretty often and she was able to say. Disturbing part, she also masturbated openly and she would try to engage men in that. That usually points to sexual abuse. Jeannie's case obviously attracted a significant amount of press attention, but also the attention of scientists. Because here's this girl who literally...
It's an opportunity.
It's an opportunity for study. They are seeing her as this opportunity for study. This is this girl who was literally isolated away from the rest of the world. This is prime...
Because you can't morally make these conditions.
You cannot.
You cannot morally make these conditions. So when somebody comes up with these conditions already, then it's an opportunity for scientific research.
Mm-hmm. So basically there's a hypothesis out there that there's a very specific periods of a person's life when you're able to hit certain developmental milestones. We all know this by now. And one of those milestones is learning a first language, being able to speak and learn a first language. I guess the Chomsky theory is that you cannot learn that language after you hit puberty. That puberty is it, and if after that you're not going to be able to learn a first language.
But had she physically reached puberty? Because sometimes with malnutrition,
I don't think she had. I don't think at this point when she's 13 years old and in the hospital, I don't think she has hit puberty or it's been stunted at some point.
Because I know girls reach puberty before men do, before boys do. Mm-hmm. But also when you're not having the nutrition and all that stuff, that might change stuff. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know how it would be that a chemical imbalance or the chemistry in your body changing means that you for some reason can't take in some sort of language.
You're just one of the lucky ones. You learn 2 languages.
Well, that's the thing, which is very interesting in the U.S. because in the U.S. they don't teach you a second language until you're in high school, and that's way too late to be teaching a language.
People learn it though. You
can, but it's not as easy as when you're a kid. I mean, there's a reason why it's easier when you're a kid to learn 2-3 languages.
Yeah. So basically, Jeannie is this the holy grail of test subjects, right, and research studies, and so every Tom, Dick, and Harry is trying to get in on this, and they all want to be part of this team that is being put together to study Jeannie. It's really ridiculous. The book basically mentions that everybody's clamoring to study her. They're all fighting each other. They're all trying to get in. It's like even randoms are trying to. Susan Curtis is one of the ones that we're going to be hearing about most often. She is a 26-year-old linguist, very interested in studying Jeannie's language development. James Kent is another important one. He's a psychologist that is given access to Jeannie pretty early on. And so at the time, this is where James Kent is kind of like a shining star. Because at the time, child abuse is just coming into public consciousness, right? So Kent was very, very important in providing Jeannie therapy and watching and documenting her progress. I noticed that the main ones who like have the biggest impact in Jeannie's life.
It's good. The name is going to change each time.
I know. Very important in it's in my mind now.
And Jeannie,
I've
Jeannie,
learned
not
that's
Janie.
part of my language now.
Jeannie.
Jeannie. Are the ones who are like basically observing her mostly, right? There's one time that James Kent pulls out a puppet. He's gonna use this puppet on her, and he pulls out the puppet, and puppet's already terrifying. I don't blame her. Yeah. And she's terrified of it. She grabs the puppet off of his hand, she throws it to the floor, and he's like, "Well, we have to get him back." He thinks it's a little curious. He's like, "We have to get him back." And Jeannie repeated after him, and she says, "Back." She said back, and she started laughing, but it's like this really nervous, uncomfortable laugh. So Kent picked up the puppet, and they repeated this a couple of times, and each time she would continue to laugh as she was able to like throw it to the ground. So Kent noted that Jeannie would primarily do one of two things. She'd laugh or she'd become very angry and frustrated. And when she was angry, this was interesting, she directed the anger inward rather than outward, meaning she would scratch herself, she wouldn't make any noise. We all know that children, when they're frustrated, when they're angry, they start making a bunch of noise. They start screaming, crying, they start yelling at you, tantrums. When she was feeling very frustrated or angry, she never outwardly made noise. She would always direct the anger inward, and she stayed very, very quiet, almost like she was going to get in trouble if she made a new noise, remember? And so she would use other objects to make noise. She would rip a piece of paper or push a chair. She would use objects to make the noise that she needed to express herself, but she was too afraid just instinctually to do. It's just, I found that so crazy.
It's like a mental adjustment.
It's so sad. It's so sad that because she's basically the whole time she grew up, all those 13 years, she was taught first and foremost to suppress be quiet and suppress any sort of expression, right? And that's why she looks so like blank all the time, and she never looks like she is reacting to anything.
Well, it's also like you gain an understanding for like facial expressions by seeing that on other people.
And if she's not seeing anybody, and if she is seeing people for very brief periods of time, that's what she's learning from other people. So you'll notice a theme of Irene giving up little bits and pieces of information about Jeannie's background throughout the years, right? And so this is one of those, is that she was forced to suppress expression. And Irene was either really embarrassed, I guess, at her role in this and knew that she had not done
what? Obviously, I think so.
Or she was just oblivious and didn't know that she had even done anything wrong.
I feel like she would have been embarrassed.
Yeah.
Maybe oblivious to some parts of it, but embarrassed overall, I would believe.
She's described as ghost-like because if she's not being engaged with, she is just wandering around her space, and she looks just very detached from everything. She's literally just wandering around, rubbing her finger against the wall, completely out of it. I wonder what was in her mind as she was doing that. Was she just taking in all of these sensory things, or was she actually thinking things? She must have been like taking everything in, right?
It could have been like tactile stuff. Like you have a lot of senses that she's like suddenly experiencing.
Another person brought into this team was Jay Shirley, a professor of psychology and behavioral sciences. He's from Texas, and he's a big Texas guy. And he was more interested in the socio-emotional rather than the cognitive. Shirley, this is like this is. I understand it's for science, and they're studying and they're trying to use this to better the rest of the world, right? In case something like this happens again, they know what to do.
And understanding how the mind works on a fundamental level.
It is still just insane, some of the stuff that they come up with, right? So Shirley suggests putting her back into that environment.
Who would suggest that?
Putting her back in, I don't believe the bad guy. But he suggests putting.
I don't know. He sounds like a freaking bad guy right now.
Shirley suggests putting her back into an environment like the one she was used to, but without the abuse, and bringing her out gradually into the world to reverse some of the trauma that she had being thrust into the outside world just immediately, and hopefully allowing for an easier study for the team to see how she kind of adjusted just to everything. I mean, and like, I get that. I get trying to reverse some of that trauma. And the team did consider it, but it was rejected eventually. I just feel like that would have been so traumatic still. Like, it would have been like trauma on trauma.
Well, I don't know. I think the question is like, sometimes, I don't know, you gain comfort from stuff that's familiar too. Mm-hmm. So I see where he was coming from, but like, the immediate suggestion of that, I don't know.
So when she arrived at the hospital, basically her development began immediately. She has all this sensory stuff around her.
Which, it could be a shock to your system, though.
It could be a shock to your system, but like the fact that she just did start developing immediately just proved that like part of it was like just being in a fucking room. Mm-hmm. Just being in a fucking room and like nothing. You get a raincoat every other Tuesday. It was slow, but it was happening. She was helping to dress herself at a certain point. She was using the toilet little by little, because remember, she's very incontinent. She is learning. Kent noted that Jeannie began a playtime ritual also. I found this really interesting, where she would play with an object, she would drop it, and she would repeat until eventually the object, she'd done it so many times the object is destroyed. So this was very important for her because she wasn't abused for dropping the object. You know, she's making a noise. She's doing something, and she is not being punished for it. And she's like...
And she tests it again.
Yeah, and so she tests it again. So she picked up on that she wasn't being abused for it. And so she has this sort of license to do something that she's not getting in trouble for. She's being able to take charge for this action, and she's learning she's able to do that, and she's able to take charge of something and do something. And so the first few times she does it, she's like laugh, but she's like super nervous, and then the laugh becomes more relaxed with each time she does it, because she's realizing this is her agency. She's able to do this, and she's able to make this decision. And sometimes she would laugh so much that it would bring tears to her eyes, which is just like... Just breaking this toy, it's brought her so much joy. You know,
relief.
Just that I'm allowed to break things.
No, that's nice though.
It was really nice. Kent allowed this. You know, he sees it as an attempt at active mastery of formerly traumatic situations. I didn't come up with that. I wrote that down verbatim. She was also learning to express herself outwardly, like with anger. So one time there was one time where this little girl was wearing wearing a hospital dress that Jeannie had also worn at one point, and so Jeannie recognized the dress on this little girl, and she went into a fit. She was very angry about this. She
said, "That's my dress."
She was very upset with the girl. But this showed that Jeannie was learning like a sense of self. She also began to hoard objects, so she was showing a sense of possession. These are all things that she's learning naturally, right? Like, it's so crazy to think that these are things that we just
take for granted.
Learn. You know, if you're locked in a room without anything, you're not going to learn these things. But if you're in the world and you have things to interact with, you start learning these things naturally. It's just wild to me. So you're going to love this one. She hoarded books. She loved to hoard books.
I do the same thing. So
she would hoard books,
same girl,
paper cups, and anything else made of plastic. She always loved plastic. Plastic was her favorite thing, and so Jeannie was really interested in learning the names for objects. Everything she came across, she wanted to know the name for, and she would get really frustrated if she didn't get an immediate answer or immediate identification for an object. And she was learning words, but she couldn't really put them into sentences.
I remember hearing that.
Yeah. So, like, she didn't really have grammar.
Knowing what things are, but not knowing how to put things together in a coherent sentence.
See a cup, and if she knew the word for cup, she would just say cup, you know, something like that. I still have problems putting words into sentences. Yeah, well, I have a horrible time with that. So it was clear that she was understanding things, and that she was like, there was a light bulb on, right? It's not like she was completely vacant. And she was taking stuff in. She just couldn't produce responses in that sort of a language sense. Jeannie was becoming less withdrawn too. She wanted to actively horseplay, and she loved when somebody would hold her and pretend to let her drop, so they'd pick her up and they'd.
Oh, really?
Like, babies love that, you know. Toddlers love that.
But it's also interesting because now she's becoming more comfortable with physical.
Well, she has to become comfortable with everything. You have to learn everything before you can learn, like, no and stuff like that. But she learned no. Basically, the first thing she ever learned was no. So she began to also show attachments very slowly to people and not just objects. She hated children. She did not show any children. So no kids. No kids.
Brenda feels the same way.
She is Jeannie you, baby. Books and no children. She didn't care about children, just adults. And at first, she didn't really register James Kent from anybody else. But he was a part of her daily routine. So James Kent was one of the people on the team that really was there always with her.
Yeah.
Big part of her daily routine. She would go on walks with him and go on drives to the store. And she didn't show any signs that she felt anything at first. She didn't show any signs that she felt anything when he would leave. But then little by little, things would happen. And there would be like a facial expression that registered that she's acknowledging that he's leaving. Like she would make just something, like some little expression or like that when he just leaves. Little by little, like a month later, she would hold his hand as a way to like detain him. Like a month after that, she would grab his hand and like pull him back so that he wouldn't leave. Like she's learning these
like
things.
Gradually becoming super attached.
And it doesn't seem like anybody's teaching her this. It seems like she's learning this naturally. That this is just a natural, instinctual thing that she's doing. And she did become very attached to him, and as well as she made friends with the adults around the hospital. She had a particular attachment to men with beards. Again, the same. Like Shirley. Like she had an attachment to Shirley because she really liked his beard. So she's learning. And then here comes Jean Butler. Remember this name. Jean Butler. That bitch. She administered the special education program at the rehabilitation center. Butler was described as a childless woman who loved children. She could identify with a child in an instant, it seems like. She was really, really, really good with kids, and she had an extreme patience with severely disturbed and handicapped children. This kind of came from her own childhood.
Okay.
So over time, there were a lot of questions about morality concerning Jeannie's case. The team eventually received a grant. They had to like present this case and say, "Hey, we can learn this from Jeannie. This is how we're putting together the grant." And they did receive the grant. There's a lot of more morality questions around this. After they received the grant, they kind of had to deliberate how to use it. And so Shirley pitched that they would need to put Jeannie's interests above scientific research.
Yes.
Okay. So basically, they would have to give Jeannie more than they were taking from her, more than they were learning from her. Yeah. They would be having to give her language and responses and things like that. And so there was
autonomy.
Oh yeah, they would have to teach her more than they were learning from her. So there was a little bit of pushback on this, which is crazy.
How would it be?
Yeah.
Oh my god!
Some people saw this as a case too rare to really pass up, and that they should use it as like a real learning opportunity, and they had to like learn everything.
It's already a learning opportunity. Like, how's it?
Yeah. Eventually, it was decided that the grant would be used primarily on language acquisition and would focus on watching how Jeannie learned language rather than teaching it to her. So I'm not completely opposed to this. So they're watching how she learns language, right? They're watching how she's learning things.
But they're not trying to actively teach it to her.
They're going to actively teach it to her. Yes. So like if they're with her, they're going to teach her a word for a cup and stuff like that. They're not just like ignoring her. But they are very much wanting to know how she's learning things. So Susan Curtis, that we kind of heard about earlier, she didn't come in until a little bit later, but she's still a really big one. So she met Jeannie in 1971 after Jeannie had already begun learning language, and Jeannie hadn't learned enough to be tested with the standard linguistic test. So tests were created specifically for Jeannie. Jeannie got her own tests. She didn't have to take the standardized testing. And 26 of them were made for Jeannie. So hot damn, Jeannie got her own 26 tests. I think one of the scientists or one of the doctors, Rigler, also said that Jeannie was the most tested child like ever. Whether that's true or a joke, I don't know. So Curtis would visit Jeannie regularly and watch and assess her progress. She replaced on when James Kent would take Jeannie out. There was a nurse that would go along, and Jeannie was pretty attached to the nurse. But Susan replaced the nurse because to go out and because she wanted to watch her, and like she would take around a notebook and write down every single word that Jeannie would ever say, because apparently Jeannie was very, very talkative on these drives.
Really?
Again, not talkative like we would think, but like words.
Maybe like identifying stuff.
She's
probably red.
Yeah, she's probably doing that, is what I'm assuming. Yes, and so Susan Curtis goes along on these drives with them, and Jeannie gets so attached to her that they have to kick the nurse, kick the nurse out of the car, and Susan Curtis just starts going on these trips instead. And basically, James Kent and Susan Curtis become like Jeannie's surrogate parents. It's so like sweet, but also so sad at the same time. Curtis stayed with Jeannie all of the summer of 1971 through to the fall, writing down everything that Jeannie says, and the big hope was that Jeannie was going to start using language to reveal things about her own past. Curtis was very interested in Jeannie revealing her own past.
Yeah.
So now let's bring Jean Butler back. Jeannie also really liked Jean Butler. She was very, very comfortable with her, and Butler had earlier been approved to take Jeannie on field trips as well, just like Curtis and Kent did. And Butler one time took her home to her own house and called the hospital and said that at this time there was an outbreak of German measles, and so Jean Butler had taken Jeannie home and said, "I can't bring Jeannie back. We both have German measles. We need to quarantine."
Did they?
They did. They start quarantining. I don't know if they have German. I don't know. I'm thinking it's some bullshit, but they could have. They definitely didn't have it for as long as Jean Butler said they did. But so they ended up quarantining, and Butler did not like this team of specialists that were working on Jeannie. She really wanted to be like, she thought she was the one that should be in there with Jeannie all the time, and she made a habit of like gossiping and bad mouthing the other specialists. She called them the Jeannie team, and so she wouldn't let them make any house calls. She wouldn't really let them come over all that often. She was very like, she would push back a lot on them.
How long were they quarantining for?
I don't know. See, this is the thing: is like every time they would call her and be like, "Hey, are you better yet?" And she's like, "Oh no, we still have the German measles." That's why it's really suspicious to me, and I think that she was probably bullshitting, is because she kept saying, "Well, actually, we still have German measles."
I don't know. It seems like isolationism again.
Yeah. She thought Susan Curtis was inept. She thought David Rigler was self-important. She thought James Kent was over-permissive. And all of them were ambitious and insensitive.
It sounds like she gave all of the details to this writer. Maybe that's why the team didn't like the writer.
No, I think she was dead by the time the book came out.
Oh, okay. Yeah, never mind.
Apparently, Jean Butler had a history of contention with the school system, though. The children's hospital, doctors, and staff. All of that. She didn't like anybody, and nobody liked her, and it was really well known.
So she was a Karen.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like Jean Butler was a Karen. I think so. Some of the specialists on the team recalled Butler wanting to be the next Anne Sullivan. That Butler said she wanted to be the next Anne Sullivan.
Caregiver.
But this is the thing about this, right? Is like there's so much he said, she said during this whole thing that we don't really know who was like telling the truth and who was just hiding their own bullshit. So it just seemed like there was a lot of fighting around Jeannie anyway, and over Jeannie. There was a lot of fighting over Jeannie. So in her journal, Jean Butler wrote, student, she really didn't like fucking Susan Curtis. So student Susan Curtis was in student, yes. Student, she made sure to point out student. She's like, she is still in school. I am above this. Student Susan Curtis was in my home recording speech and attempting to amuse Jeannie. However, she followed the child and hovered over her most of the day. She had a notebook handy and discussed Jeannie's speech and lack of it, and her eating habits in a critical manner in front of her. That evening, Dr. Rigler phoned, and I told him that the help he was giving me in the house was not helping me.
Oh, so her
so get
specifically.
This bitch out of my house. Get it out. Okay. Basically, in these journals, Butler just expresses concern that Jeannie is being tested too much also, which I
can understand that.
Yeah, I can. Jeannie's learning. She shouldn't be overly tested and overly worked, you know.
Maybe give her space.
Give her space and let her kind of learn things. That's what the grant is supposed to do anyways.
Yeah.
Let Jeannie learn things. So remember, Butler kept pushing back the quarantine.
Yeah.
She kept saying, we still have German measles. We can't I can't bring her back to the hospital. Give everybody the measles. Bullshit. So she kept pushing that back. And not long after that, guess what? Jean Butler applied to the Department of Public Social Services to become Jeannie's foster parent and legal guardian.
No.
At this point, Jeannie's legal guardian is an attorney named John, I believe it's Minor, John Minor. So, because custody was obviously taken from Irene. And so, yeah, Jean Butler just says, I'm going to be her foster mother.
So I feel like I'm mystified at this point because I know somebody eventually, she lives with somebody for a long time, but I don't, I feel like I've got it wrong. Okay, but let's see how the story unfolds.
Yeah. She does seem to have a pretty good life with Jean Butler, though. Like, Jean Butler doesn't seem to be, like, abusing Jeannie or anything. She just seems like she's trying to push the others out so that she can have dominion over Jeannie. And if she is trying to be the next Anne Sullivan, that's her intention, right? Is she's trying to get famous off of Jeannie. But it does seem that Jeannie really likes her and really likes living with her. DPSS workers, I'm going to call them social service workers. Social service workers are hesitant about placing a patient, though, in the home of somebody on the team of specialists there to help the patient, which seems like a conflict of interest, so I get it, right?
Yeah.
But as of the time, they're also hesitant placing Jeannie in Butler's home permanently because Butler is a single woman who is living alone, and they're like, there's no man living in that house. Who's the father figure?
Who runs a bank account?
So Jean Butler says, okay, Jean Butler does have a boyfriend. She says, boyfriend, move in. And the boyfriend moves in. And she's like, look, we're a 2-parent household now. The times, man.
Did it work, though?
Joan Crawford
Did they have
had
to
to
get
do that,
married?
too. They gave Joan Crawford a hard time about adopting children because they said Joan Crawford was single or divorced.
They give us a hard time because we're...
Yeah, so Jean Butler basically applies for this, and we're waiting for it. So, but during, like, you know, Jeannie's stay with Butler, David Rigler is still coming in, Susan Curtis is still coming in, and David Rigler actually gets Jeannie a puppy. So something we didn't really touch on was that Jeannie is afraid of dogs. She hates animals. She hates dogs. She hates cats. She's terrified of them, and they really are trying to get her over this, and so David Rigler brings this puppy.
Poor puppy.
I guess. I don't know. So from behind a fence, Jeannie is okay with the dog. She knows that it's behind a fence. Dog can't get to her. However, behind a fence, if she sees a cat behind a fence, she's still terrified. She's like, Key can get over here.
Well, because cats can climb.
Cats are fucking crazy. Cats are
Some
evil.
cats are. Your parents' is crazy. Your parents' cat is crazy.
Yeah, but they're very much trying to break Jeannie's fear of dogs. So Rigler would also come over and have Jeannie watch Lassie with him, and so he would sit and watch Lassie with Jeannie, and it's just like it was like, no, I don't like dogs. I'm not into the dogs. I don't care. Don't like them. Jean Butler basically says that Jeannie made such great progress in her house while she was staying with her. She's like, you don't even understand. In my house, Jeannie's learning full sentences. She is potty trained now. She, can speak in full sentences. She's doing fantastically. Why would you remove her from my house? She's really making this case. I don't know. I'm calling bullshit on that one too. But it's, yeah.
Well, she has everybody coming through the house, right? So yeah. I would figure they'd be able to witness some of this, right?
She is kind of keeping them at arm's length, though. So, like, I don't know how much they're able to see here. But I don't know. Jean Butler also asked for a 38% increase in pay as being part of the Jeannie team. And then the application to be Jeannie's foster home was eventually rejected by DPSS, and Jeannie is taken away from the home and back to the hospital. And Jean Butler wrote that Jeannie was very upset and did not want to leave her home, and was saying, no.
She was only there to quarantine for the measles.
I know, but Jean Butler says, well, when I told Jeannie that she had to go with these people and go back to the hospital, then she said, no, and I don't want to do it. And if this is true, it's very sad. Because she's being ripped from a home that she's very much enjoying.
She already got established.
There, yeah, and apparently she really liked Jean's boyfriend also. Her boyfriend was named Floyd, and she really, Jeannie did like these people, But interesting enough, Jeannie was not in the hospital long before she was placed into a foster home, that of David Rigler and his wife, Marilyn. So David Rigler, who'd been bringing the puppy over and trying to get her dogs, and like he was a leading person on this team from the very beginning, and so Jeannie is placed in their care. And remember, DPSS
that sounds like it's the same conflict.
They said it's the conflict of interest. We can't give her to you because it's conflict of interest.
Do you think it might have the fact to do with that they're married?
Oh yeah, that they were
Yeah.
married and there's this like 2-parent household and yeah, all
Instead
of
of
that.
unwed.
Of course, of course. So David Rigler said he was surprised by that they rejected Gene Butler's application, but that he had no part in it, which Gene Butler does not believe. Gene Butler believes this was a scam from the beginning.
It sounds like
Sounds
it.
like
I
it. I
don't
cannot
know.
say it
I don't.
doesn't.
I don't disagree, but I don't know. I don't have the all the deets.
Yeah, Rigler said that his partner Howard Hansen had suggested the idea of Jeannie living with him and his wife. And since there were no alternative homes to place her in, that he said, okay, well, I'm going to talk this over with my wife, Marilyn. We're going to talk about it and talk to our kids about it and make this decision as a family because it's a big deal.
Yes,
Like, remember,
it is.
this is, I know we kind of went over like how disturbed Jeannie was and how, she had incontinence and she does have issues.
She's a full-time care.
Yes.
Full-time care.
This
for
is
her,
a family that's already established. This is David Rigler, his wife Marilyn. They have 3 adolescent children. They have the dog, and they have a cat. And so it's a big decision. It is a big decision taking her in. But they do decide to take her in. They said that they were only going to take her in for about 3 months to a year. Jeannie ends up staying with them for 4 years.
Oof.
Very long time. The Rigler's house is also in a really exclusive neighborhood, and I looked up Laughlin Park in Los Angeles, and Cecil B. DeMille even had an estate there at one point. It apparently was like this a really like hustling, bustling part of Los Angeles that a lot of movie stars would move into, like before this.
Oh my gosh, Jeannie was.
She
living with all
upgraded.
the
She went
movie
to
stars.
Bel Air, man. Jeannie in Bel Air. Fresh Jeannie of Bel Air. Yeah, but so in the book it says that at the time the Riglers moved into this neighborhood, it's a slump, but the doctors would still move there. I'm like, okay, well, it's a slump. Really?
Yeah.
Okay, calm down. Yeah, so Jeannie's room in
That's
the
what
house,
they call
though,
Austin.
Jeannie got to move into their library. What?
She loves books.
She loves
I love books.
She did love books. So they had this in mind. And so remember, Jeannie loves books. She hoards books, but she's also destructive. So they did have to rearrange the room and kind of put the books away because Jeannie, if she opened a book and looked at a page and liked it, she would just take the page. She's like, I love that Jeannie just is all about self-care and happiness.
Yeah.
She's like, I
You
want
do
it.
your, I want it.
I want it.
I got it.
I got it. But so there was a lot of adjustments to be made, right? This is a family here. They have to adjust to Jeannie. Jeannie has to adjust to them. And so when Jeannie arrived, it was challenging. And she started out defecating in all the rooms pretty much, and she would hide it. At one point, David Rigler said that she took cologne and masked the smell. So, she's thinking about
She's
it.
thinking about it.
She was very incontinent, and every 10 minutes or so, when she first arrived, she would pee herself.
It's a new space.
Yeah, but that went away very quickly. She very much got used to like being there, and she was comfortable there, and she was comfortable with David Rigler.
Rigler?
She was comfortable with David Rigler and his wife Marilyn. She like actually grew to really love Marilyn. She like loved Marilyn. But remember, Rigler's had that puppy. And so they had to like figure out how to like get her comfortable with this dog. So at first they would have the dog outside. They would never have the dog in the house at the same time. They would have the dog outside, separated by the glass sliding door. And then over time, when Jeannie was comfortable with it, they opened the sliding door and there was a screen door. So they would have the screen door. And, Jeannie would become comfortable with that. And eventually they opened the screen door and the dog would come inside. And at one point, the dog was like turned away from Jeannie, and Jeannie reached over and touched the tail. And David Rigler said from then, Jeannie was perfectly fine with the dog. I don't know if she was like in love with the dog, but like tolerant.
Tolerant of the dog.
Yeah. So she was okay. There was a moment during this that
I'm all engaged in the dog Jeannie
I
stuff.
know I am too. I'm like, I want her to have a puppy real bad. I want her to love this puppy. So there's one moment. There's also a moment where Jeannie is in the house and she sees a picture of a wolf on a magazine, and she flips out. And she is just not okay with it. She's like really upset. It really upsets her. And David Rigler just cannot figure it out why she's so afraid of this dog. Remember, Irene is not giving us all the information. She's like giving us tidbits here and there. And so David Rigler asks her, do you know why she would be scared of like this picture? And she's like, oh yeah, actually, because my husband Clark used to imitate a dog and bark and growl at her in order to keep her quiet, and so she wouldn't make any noise. And when she would make noise, he would go in there on all fours and growl at her from the shadows, and then go up to her and like act like he was going to bite her. And then he would stand outside of her door and bark like ferociously for like an hour and fucking traumatized her, acting like this damn dog. And so no wonder she didn't fucking like any of these damn dogs, right? And then David Wriggler's probably like, I made her watch Lassie? Really? And you could have told me this earlier, Irene?
Well, he was definitely mentally ill.
That's fucking scary.
That's
terrifying. I will say one thing about that dramatized movie that we watched. At the beginning of it, they have a close-up of Jeannie, and in the background in the shot you can see shadows, but you can only hear her growl. And it's terrifying. That is scary. That is scary. And no wonder she was fucking traumatized from that, too. I don't know. But, like, at least now they know that, right?
Yeah.
And they can, like, act accordingly. It's like, Irene, give us the information.
Did he also act like a cat?
She's, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. He acted like Keith, maybe. So the grant that the team had gotten, remember, had provided $100,000 over 2 years in research. So David Wriggler stopped much of his work at the Children's Hospital when Jeannie came to live with them so that he could focus most of his time on Jeannie. His wife, Marilyn, was also paid about $500 to $1,000 a month to care for Jeannie and to, like, you know, she was
Be the
helping her
caregiver.
with developmental stuff. They also got about $230 a month in foster care support, which goes towards food and anything that the foster child would need. And
It's a good amount of money.
yeah, especially in back then money. Yeah, yeah. Jeannie being at the Wriggler house was a huge benefit to the team, it seems like, because they could work with Jeannie and go there and study her. And
Unlike before.
Gene Butler was not shutting them out, right? And now Gene Butler shut out, you know? I don't know if Gene Butler keeps coming around. I couldn't find, I don't think I wrote down whether she was still coming around at all at this point. But Susan Curtis was there about every damn day writing stuff down. She would basically show up with a red notebook and write down every single word Jeannie would say. Remember, Susan Curtis wants to know about Jeannie's past and wants Jeannie to, like, express that and, like, talk about her own past. So Gene Butler's there writing down everything that Jeannie's saying. Or not Gene Butler. Susan Curtis. A lot of damn scientists in this story. Jeannie is still learning, but was growing older and seemed to be doing the thing that teenagers do. She's stubborn, right? She's really stubborn. Teenagers are just stubborn, and it doesn't matter how developmentally delayed, she's going to exhibit that same sign. And so most of the time, like, she was saying words and she was able to string like 2-3 words together into a sentence. So she would, the example that the book gives is like, so Jeannie would say something like, Monday, Curtis come. Which means Curtis is coming. Yeah, Susan Curtis is coming Monday. But instead, Jeannie got lazy and didn't want to say all of that. And so she would condense her words and sentences and say something like, so Monday, Curtis come home, or Monday, Curtis come would turn into Munka. She found her own way to fucking communicate. She said, I don't want to say all these
She said,
words.
"You're a scientist. You figure it out."
You figure it out. She said, I see that notebook. Do it. You can do it. So she could say these full words, but she didn't want to. She just didn't want to. Curtis would also play the piano for Jeannie, and
That's
Jeannie apparently was just mesmerized by this. She would stand there, and Curtis said she looked like she was almost hallucinating. Listening to this music, and it was usually only classical music and only if it was being played live. And Wriggler says that this was because she would hear when she was in the room strapped to the potty chair, there was a neighbor boy who would play the piano. She would hear that.
This is one of her
Makes
only
me want to
sensory
cry.
things.
I feel like real sad every time I hear anything about this stuff and Jeannie, and like I look at her face and she's just so sweet. So again, Jeannie's very close to Marilyn Wriggler. And when Jeannie would get upset, and she would still get destructive, right? She would start clawing at herself and like moving things to make noise, and like she's not fixed, you know.
Yeah.
She's not.
You're never
She's
gonna
not
be.
healed. So
She's not fully rehabilitated.
exactly. So she's still like reverting to certain things, and so Marilyn thought, oh, well, Jeannie's a woman. Vanity will help that, and so Marilyn would paint Jeannie's fingernails.
Yeah.
And because Jeannie didn't want to mess them up, she wouldn't claw at things.
Oh.
And Jeannie also apparently loved being told that she was pretty. somebody would tell Jeannie that she was pretty, Jeannie loved it.
I mean,
She's
who
like,
doesn't?
Who loves? Tell me I'm pretty, please. Baby, you're pretty. You're pretty.
Stop.
Yeah.
Stop.
Jeannie loved it, and so Marilyn would use that tactic and would say, and if Jeannie started like clawing at herself or like doing, throwing a tantrum, Marilyn would say, "Well, Jeannie, you don't look very pretty," and so Jeannie would stop. Yeah.
She'd be like, "Oh, we can't have this."
During Jeannie's fits, she said, "I must be beautiful." During Jeannie's fits, Marilyn would also say, "You are upset. You are having a rough time." She seemed very caring. And it got to the point where Marilyn would say, "You are upset," and Jeannie would finish with, "Rough time, rough time." And rough time eventually turned into, like, she would aggressively shake her finger. She would shake her finger, and that was her expressing that, rough time, rough time. And she would stop saying rough time, and she would just... So Jeannie is learning language, and this is all they want, is Jeannie to learn language. Jeannie's learning language, but she's doing it in her own way. She's learned how to use language in her own way.
Oh, in a way that works for her.
Yes, she knew a little bit of sign language. They taught her a little bit of sign language, so she could sign things sometimes. And she would, turn something like a phrase like rough time into... And they knew it, and she knew that they knew it. So she's learning things. Jeannie's language is like a 2-year-old, right? And with kids, all kids, doesn't matter how slow or fast they learn language, they're going to learn it in the same sorts of steps. And so the idea is here that a toddler will learn like, a couple words. They start learning words very slowly, and then they start stringing them together really slowly. So like a sentence will be like 2 words,
Yeah.
And this is what Jeannie's doing, like 2 or 3 words. And then at some point, that toddler or however old they are, there's an explosion of words, and they just start saying words for everything. They just start saying all these words, and then they start putting all these words together, and it's this explosion of speech, and they just start talking, right? So Jeannie made it to the stage where she's starting to string like 2, 3 words together and saying different things.
Connecting stuff.
But Jeannie never had that explosion of language, of speech that they were hoping for, and she would really prefer to gesture her language in other ways, whether shaking a finger or sign language or, pointing at something or guiding somebody to something. She had her own way of doing it.
Yeah, she didn't like to verbalize what she wanted.
She performed language.
Okay.
Jeannie just had a very unique way of communicating. Out in public, this is what I found really sweet, is that out in public, she learned to be very expressive, especially with her eyes. Her eyes were very expressive. So she could give a look or an expression to somebody, just random person, stranger, and show that she liked something or that she was interested in something, like really hone in on something with her eyes, and they'd give it to her. Like there was one instance where there was a woman, and Jeannie was fixated on this faux pearl necklace, and this woman took off her faux pearl necklace and gave it to Jeannie.
Is she wearing that in one of the pictures?
I don't know. I should have looked for that.
This?
No, that is the very first picture ever taken of Jeannie. She's 13 there. That's when she was first taken from her parents.
Okay.
Yeah, that is a photographer's photo. But because Jeannie is not hitting this explosion that they're all hoping that she's going to hit, other scientists are starting to call her and this study a failure. Saying, well, Jeannie's a failure. She's not going to give us what we want. What we're hoping for is that she'll be able to do a mathematical equation and, speak with the queen at one point over the pea soup,
But like, a failure?
A failure, yeah. This is sad. Okay, so I found this sentence really interesting from the book. It kind of describes her language a little bit. She could categorize. Some people have said that categorizing is the key to learning language, that grammar is just organizing things into smaller and smaller categories. Jeannie could organize, but she couldn't learn grammar. Perfectly said, I think. So she can organize things and like organize a thought and put it into language, but she just doesn't know grammar. So one time they also asked her to replicate a structure using like popsicle sticks. So she looked at this structure, and I made out of popsicle sticks, and they said, recreate it, Jeannie. And she did, like perfectly, like by color and everything. And like she was very bright in that way, and she was there. Other scientists were saying that Jeannie wasn't there, and Curtis insisted that she was. Curtis said, Susan Curtis said that Jeannie was more mentally disturbed than intellectually disabled. right?
That makes sense.
It does make a lot of sense. And the Wrigglers very much agreed with this, that Jeannie was intelligent and she could do things, but she was learning to do things in her own way, which was completely going against the study that they were wanting to do, because they were wanting to make this child
A linguistic study instead of a communication study.
Yeah, so she was very curious also, and the Wrigglers even taught her how to do tasks. And remember, it is like 1970 something, so the tasks that Jeannie learns to do, you want to take some guesses?
Wash dishes.
She learns to iron. She probably learned to wash dishes. She learns to sew, and she gets to sewing by hand and by machine. She's able to sew by both, right? The woman's work.
Honestly, but those things are very important, you know?
And that she's able to do that shows that there's a light bulb on there, right?
Yeah.
Like she's able to do things.
Because the dexterity that goes into some of that, you know.
It says earlier in the book, and I didn't even write this down, that like her fingertips, like while she moved very slow, and we saw that sort of clip of her moving, her fingertips could like go really fast, and she could flip through pages of a book like really fast.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So she had a lot of dexterity.
So
Should be good with video games.
she was also great with sketching to communicate if she didn't know a word. So one thing that always interested Curtis, again, remember, is if Jeannie would ever be able to talk about her past and relate memories from her past. And there was one time where they went to the hospital, they were doing something at the hospital, and they were walking down the hospital hallway, and there was a little boy who came up and shot a toy gun at them, and Jeannie was scared. She got scared, and she called the little boy a bad boy and said, "Bad gun." And from then, she started saying, I don't think this was the same day, but she, from here, started saying different things. Like she started saying, "Father hit Jeannie big stick. Father take piece big wood hit cry." So she's relating memories. She's talking about her past and talking about her memories. And it's incredible, you know? She's like hitting these things that...
I mean, but you also, like, there's a subject there, there's a verb, there's connections, you know, like...
I just think that's not even so important. It's just not. She's
not, but it's definitely there.
It's there. It's there.
You
Yeah.
know?
So to call Ginny a failure is like so wrong. It's so off. And but I think what they were missing, what this team of scientists were missing, was that she was communicating and she was doing these things and she was talking about her past. She was able to talk about her past and have memories and think about them, and then tell them to somebody. You know. So let's bring it back to Irene for a second. Let's bring Irene back into the story. Irene had basically been coming around occasionally over the years. She basically saw Jeannie like once a week over this whole time. And we're talking about a 4-year period, you know.
That's more than I thought.
Yeah, and so it was really important to the team that Jeannie, again, maintain contact with Irene, because that was the only link she had to her past. I don't get it. I guess they wanted her to have a link to her past, but they had her mother in her life. They made sure that her mother was in her life. And she didn't appear to ever acknowledge her brother, but she would definitely acknowledge her mother. She wouldn't always, like, run up and hug her or anything like that, but there were times where Jeannie would get very close to her mother's face and Jeannie would, like, look her in the eyes, or, like, do something like that, you know, something very, to me, that's very
intimate?
personal. It is very intimate, very personal, and it is very powerful, you know. Irene basically had been bouncing around Los Angeles, and she was living in the Clark Wiley house, you know, because she'd inherited that, and that was split 3 ways between Jeannie, Irene, and John. But like, where else was she going to go? She owned this house. She was just going to stay there, you know. I feel awful about that.
Well, I mean,
place of
you could try
torture.
to sell it.
I don't know how she like would look into Jeannie's room and not see that for the rest of her life, and the way that was, you know. She must have been really closed off to it and really like hardened herself not to see that and just burst into tears. She did like redecorate the house a bunch and like make it completely unrecognizable on the inside, but still, you know. I think I would walk in that room and I would see Jeannie strapped to a potty chair at 10 years old. And so Irene would basically just go around to wherever Jeannie was staying. Whatever foster home Jeannie was at, Irene would go over there, except for the Wriggler house. Irene didn't ever go to the Wriggler house more than like 2 or 3 times. The Wrigglers would always have Irene meet Jeannie in a neutral place. We'll get to that later, because Jean Butler is taking notes of all this shit. She's like, okay. So Irene just sees...
Jean Butler again?
Jean Butler is still here. She is still here in the shadows. She's not going away. Irene just seems to be very detached and disengaged. To me, she seems like she kind of is closing that chapter off in her mind and won't even like acknowledge any of that past trauma, right? Even though she's had therapy. But this might be trauma too. That might be her way of dealing with her own trauma. I don't know. The book makes a good observation that Irene, I thought this was really good. This was a really good way to put it. Irene spent so long under Clark's control. And when she finally got her way and was able to take her child, and they got out of there, they got out of that situation, the first thing that happens is she gets her child taken away. She gets arrested. She's all over the news, being called, child abuser. And then Clark kills himself. That's trauma. Like, she left, and then it was just a chain of negative events that followed that. And what does that do to her mind also, right? That can't be good.
I would have probably not framed it like that if you hadn't.
Yeah. So it seems like Irene just pretty much lived a quiet, pretty sad life. She had a small inheritance from Clark's estate, but like that was dwindling pretty fast. And she would sew and sell dolls for money, and she even mortgaged the house that she was living in. So paid off the house, and she just mortgaged it because she needed money. Gene Butler was pissed about being obviously, Gene Butler is pissed. We'll bring it back to Gene Butler. Gene Butler is pissed about being rejected. And then Wriggler getting to take Jeannie, right?
So this is like 4 years.
Oh, she is like, this is over the whole 4 years. It does not matter. Gene Butler is pissed, and she is holding this grudge, and she is, she's going to ruin everything. She's going to make sure she ruins everything. She's going to burn it all to the ground. So this is a breaking point between her and the team, and she basically went around trashing their names and trying to avenge herself, right? Gene Butler basically became a bug in Irene's ear and came in regular contact with Irene, and made sure that Irene was like on her side, and she became friends with Irene and talk all the time. And Gene Butler was gossiping to Irene and telling them all these bad things about the doctors and bad-mouthing them and saying, they're doing all this. They're not handling Jeannie right. They're doing all this bad stuff to Jeannie, and really putting a sour bug in Irene's ear. And it does seem like it was working. It seems like Irene was growing more and more agitated with the team with Jeannie's team.
It's like you already have somebody who is known to be somebody who has trauma, and you are giving them
impressionable.
Yes, impressionable.
Yeah.
So
Irene does seem very impressionable. Irene also, positive note, got her eyes fixed. She was able to have the cataracts taken out. She did go blind later on in life due to glaucoma, but she was, she got her eyesight fixed for a little good while. And when she got her eyesight fixed, remember, she had never seen Jeannie, basically. She was blind. She didn't really know what Jeannie looked like or how she acted or anything like that. So when she saw Jeannie walk for the first time, she was horrified, and she thought it was all the doctor's fault. And she was like, what they said in the book was, she asked, what did you guys do to her?
Wow.
I know.
What did you do to her?
And basically, she couldn't comprehend or just wouldn't admit her role in Jeannie's condition. Irene pretty much felt on the outside of Jeannie's new life and all of these people that were in her life. She felt on the outside. She felt like they didn't like her, that they didn't want anything to do with her. And she's just becoming more and more antagonized. And this is going to blow over a little bit later. So basically, years pass, and Jeannie's progress kind of slowed just because she learns how to do her own form of communication. She learns how to communicate herself, and she's pretty comfortable with it. So I guess by like scientist standards, she was slowing down. But in her own way, she was not. She was learning still, but doing it in her own way, just not the way they wanted her to. But remember, they had like $100,000 grant over 2 years.
Yes.
And that was coming back up for review. So they needed to present this case that they should be given more grant money to like keep researching and doing all this stuff. And enter Gene Butler, and she wrote all these criticisms, all the criticisms she could. Gene Butler just wrote all the criticisms that she could about Jeannie's lack of progress, and basically saying that when she was with me, she was speaking full sentences, and now she's regressed. She's basically like what she was when she first went to the hospital. Gene also criticized the Wrigglers for being really harsh towards Irene. She said that they were really mean towards Irene, and they wouldn't allow Irene at their home, and they would make her have her weekly visits with Jeannie and other places. And Marilyn Wriggler said that this was pretty much so that Irene wouldn't come over to their house and see Marilyn acting motherly towards Jeannie.
Makes sense.
And she didn't want to make Irene feel bad, right? This could be just, again, bullshit on both parts. We don't know. We just don't know.
Or it could be partial truths.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. Jean also said that the Wrigglers weren't giving Irene any money. They said that even though they traveled on the Genie Fund, which is like conferences, there was a couple sketchy like conferences that were listed in the book.
I feel like there always is with that much money.
There's a conference in Hawaii, and I'm like, do you need a conference in Hawaii? Do you need it?
But who doesn't need a conference in Hawaii?
But she's saying they're basically traveling around on the Genie Fund, and they have foster care assistants, and they're still not giving Irene any money, and they're making Irene travel out to these places to meet Jeannie, but not giving her any travel money or anything like that. She wrote it, Mother's Need versus Wriggler's Greed.
She must have been super proud of that.
She's proud of it, but she fucking hates the Wrigglers. She hates all of these scientists. I'm guessing she keeps putting all of this stuff into Irene's ear. Like, they're not giving you any money. They're being really mean, not letting you at their house. What are they hiding? They just want you out of the
Irene
picture.
is impressionable and is going to latch onto this.
Yeah, so this is basically the grant is rejected and the research basically ends. I don't think because of this. I think the scientists whoever was giving the grant basically sees Jeannie's lack of progress and sees that the Wrigglers didn't really like follow the suggestions of the people giving the grants to like study her, and they say, well, we're just not going to give you any more grant money.
So then what happens?
Okay. But gonna get heated. Okay, so Jeannie turns 18, and basically the Wrigglers agree to end their foster care. So Jeannie's been living with them for 4 years. This makes me so sad. Just adopt her. But I get it. Like, like we hear about all of Jeannie's progress and that Jeannie's happy and stuff like that, but it must have been very challenging having Jeannie in their home. And, like, they have to be with her all the time, right? They have to give her constant
attention,
watching after and attention and learning and, like, keep her stimulated. But they agree to end their foster care of Jeannie, and they let her go live with her mother at the old house that she spent 13 years
the old house?
trapped and strapped to a fucking potty chair. Jeannie goes back to live in that house with her fucking mother.
How is that in any way okay?
And how did anybody allow it? How, like, it infuriates me. So do you think Irene's going to be able to handle Jeannie?
No.
Irene couldn't handle Jeannie the first 13 years because she didn't have to do anything with Jeannie. Jeannie was strapped to a fucking chair. Irene never had to parent Jeannie. And now, being strapped to a fucking chair for 13 years kind of messes up your brain. Jeannie is very challenging. She's, it takes a team of specialists to, like, really help her and teach her things. Irene obviously couldn't handle Jeannie. She'd never taken care of her anyway. And so, like, she finds all Jeannie's actions disturbing. She's, like, seeing this all for the first time, that Jeannie's, like, masturbating openly, or that Jeannie is, like, shoving food. A big thing that Jeannie would do is shove food in her mouth and just hold it there until, because she couldn't really chew solid foods all that much. So she would hold it in there until the saliva would break it down, and then she would swallow it. So she's doing all of these things that Jeannie just does, and Irene is, like, very disturbed by all of it, and she blames the Wrigglers for all of the way that Jeannie is. And she's like, the Wrigglers, this is why Jeannie is this way. What did they do to her? So the Wrigglers basically try to help. They say, we're going to hire babysitters. They set her up in summer school so that Irene can send her somewhere and people can take care of her. And they set her up for daycare. But Irene's fucking lazy and doesn't take Jeannie to any of these things. She doesn't take her to summer school or daycare. And she, like, would basically say, Jeannie, do you want to go? And Jeannie would be like, no. And Irene would be like, okay. And Jeannie lays around the house. Remember, at the Wriggler's house, Jeannie has all of this stimulation. Music. There's always people tending to her. She has music. She has art. She has all of these things that she's always being stimulated by. And she goes to laying around the house all day. No stimulation. Again, in that same fucking house, no stimulation. So Irene cannot handle her. She calls social services. She doesn't call the Wrigglers. She calls social services, and Jeannie basically bounces from foster home to foster home.
After the age 18?
After age 18, yeah, because she can't be counted as an adult who can take care of herself. She's counted as an adult who is incapacitated. Okay. And so she has a guardian. And it's just the callousness of this that she literally takes Jeannie from this. But the Wrigglers gave her Jeannie. They gave her Jeannie, and then she calls social services, and they come and take her and put her in foster homes. And so basically at the foster homes, Jeannie starts regressing, like immediately, really fast. She is... Like, there's one foster home that she shows up with all of her collected plastic containers that she loves so much. She loves all her plastic containers. The foster family puts them in a closet, and she's not allowed to play with them. She can't have them anymore. One foster home is also really super strict and, like, thrives on cleanliness. That's not the home for Jeannie then. It's not the home for Jeannie. Jeannie should never have been there. And Jeannie had a...
Makes me think of Wife Swap.
Out of everything, Jeannie did, despite everything, Jeannie did have a really strong bond with her mother. And that's what they all said, that she had a strong bond with her mother, which I guess it's her mother, you know, that's blood. And so Susan Curtis would go over there and...
So Susan Curtis was still doing...
Still making regular visits to Jeannie. But Irene was, like, banned from seeing Jeannie anymore. So Jeannie effectively stopped seeing her mother. But when Susan Curtis comes over, she says that Jeannie would sign things like... Love my mother. I miss my mother. I miss mom. You know, things like that. And it's just like fucking breaks my heart, man. It's crazy because it's like this Irene was an abuser. She was still abusing Jeannie too.
I mean, you can love your abuser. That's definitely like a thing.
But Jeannie saw her as the one who kept her alive and kept her going and would like come and sneak food to her sometimes, you know. So Jeannie is obviously abused in all of these foster homes. There's one time where at one of these foster homes where Jeannie throws up and they beat her for it and tell her if she throws up again that she'll get another beating. So Jeannie basically stops speaking because she's scared to open her mouth. So she stops speaking altogether. She doesn't open her mouth. If it's time to eat, she only opens her mouth for a second to shove food in it and closes it. And she's always with her mouth closed. And she will sign towards Susan Curtis that she misses her mother. And it's just so sad, right? Like, this is not a child who needs any more abuse. This is a child who learned. Remember that James Kent said that she was learning mastery over her trauma, and now she's being given all of this trauma just again. It just breaks my fucking heart. Curtis also says that Jeannie didn't understand why she was being moved from home to home so much, and that Jeannie believed that it was because she was a bad girl. And like would express that. Remember, she's not saying full sentences like this, but she's like conveying that she's a bad girl. And so it's just sad that that's what Jeannie thought. That's why she thought she was being moved around so much. But instead of caring about Jeannie, Irene filed a fucking lawsuit against the team of scientists. And after Curtis completed her dissertation called Jeannie, a psycholinguist. I'm horrible with words. Jeannie, a psycholinguist. Linguini.
A psycholinguistic
study of a modern day wild child. So Irene sues over this dissertation, says that basically it's a breach of patient confidentiality and that she accuses the whole team of treating Jeannie like a test subject rather than a person and overworking her with all these tests. And the case actually went on for a long time until like 1984. Yeah, it was a long time. Yeah, eventually Irene didn't receive any money. So she lost, but she also wins weirdly in the same respect.
Because they shut down everything, didn't they?
Well, no, the court directs Susan Curtis to direct a program of linguistics for Jeannie. She's not allowed to give Jeannie these tests, but she is allowed to, like, she creates a program for Jeannie to, like, learn speech and stuff still. And the Children's Hospital is ordered to provide Jeannie with, like, yearly care. So it's good. It works out well for Jeannie. So after Susan Curtis's dissertation goes public, she makes money on it, and she sets aside about $8,000 in whatever money is for Jeannie. It's a fund for Jeannie. She sets aside that money, and so after this,
so she publishes her. She actually like book publishes.
Yeah, and so she has about $8,000 in royalties that she puts in a fund for Jeannie, and she takes that $8,000 and relinquishes the fund towards the program that she's ordered by the court to create for Jeannie. So much fuckery just happens over the years. It just infuriates me, dude. Like, Jeannie is covered under... This is another one that's, like, crazy to me. Jeannie's covered under Social Security until they discover that she owns 1/3 interest of her childhood home. They demand that she repay the money. How are they... why is it, like, described like this? Is she going to the bank? Is she having phone calls with these people? And they're like, you need to give this money back. And she's like, oh, okay, I shall do that. No, she doesn't know what the hell's going on.
And if you have custody of her, you also have custody of her state. I don't understand this.
She had a $4,000 trust fund. So remember, John Miner was the attorney who basically had custody over her. And that's all supposed to be handled by John Miner. So John Miner says that the trust was for Jeannie's care and debts. Like, what debts does Jeannie fucking have? What country are we living in that Jeannie...
It's a Tupperware. Tupperware is expensive.
It's like faux pearls.
Like, have you seen those
fucking
Tupperware parties?
debts does Jeannie have? Miner basically says that all of that money is owed to Wriggler. And that Wriggler Wriggler does agree with this, that all the money is for him. So, but it doesn't seem like this is a malicious thing. It seems more like to keep Jeannie from losing her benefits by saying, yeah, that money's mine. She doesn't get that money. They're trying to keep her on Social Security benefits. They didn't want her benefits taken away from her. So they also said that the money was part of the house, and the house is not a liquid asset, so it shouldn't even be counted. I don't know. It's just a bunch of fuckery. But then, like, after Jeannie does turn 18, guess who fucking forgets to update his status as her legal guardian? John Miner. Guess who gets fucking custody of Jeannie? Irene, who doesn't even want Jeannie in her own damn house. And Irene basically bans all of the doctors and scientists who've worked on her over the last 4 or 5 years, however long it was, from having any contact with Jeannie. This includes Curtis and the Wrigglers. Yeah.
So then
she basically like bans them from seeing her anymore. All of these attachments that Jeannie built and Jeannie formed with these people, all of that progress just gone. You know who isn't banned from Jeannie?
Oh, that
Jane Butler.
Butler.
Gene Butler gets regular contact with Irene, basically keeps trashing the scientists. Gene Butler is basically the one who like
masterminded this.
Yeah, and basically convinced Irene to go and like sue them and all of that stuff. Gene fucking Butler, man. Gene fucking Butler. But Gene has a stroke in 1986 and basically it leaves her with that.
So that's like 2 years later.
Yeah, I'm writing this part down because it's like relevant to right now. But she is left with aphasia, which is what Bruce Willis has.
Oh.
Yeah, that's why he's leaving Hollywood. So Bruce Willis has aphasia. I'm not exactly clear on what aphasia is still. I know it's something, a degenerative, like, neurological thing. So I need to look that up. And then Gene Butler dies in 1988. So over the years, a few of the team members are able to see and have contact with Jeannie, like, a little bit more. Just at various points of Jeannie's life. Shirley sees Jeannie at Jeannie's 27th birthday and basically says that she is incredibly depressed and doesn't speak or do anything with anybody. She does keep contact with her mother over the course of her life, at various degrees of frequency. At one institution that she's staying in, she's allowed to see her mom once a month, and then at another facility, she sees her every weekend. So it's like Irene still wants to be in her life and still like visits her and stuff, but doesn't want to take care of her. She doesn't want to
deal with her.
Doesn't want to deal with her.
It's kind of like visiting your friend's dog.
And so Susan Curtis basically has not had contact with Jeannie since she was banned the first time, and has made various attempts to have contact with Jeannie, even up until today. She still tries to see Jeannie and is denied. She's not allowed. Irene dies in 2003.
How is she not allowed if Irene is already gone?
I don't freaking know. She did. Irene dies in 2003. John Wiley. He did give an interview. You can search the interview, and he kind of talks about it and basically says that he didn't have any contact with them. Maybe saw them like once over the course of the years and stuff, and had a lot of trauma on his own and felt very like left out and unimportant. And he died in 2011. And Jeannie is now living in a private state care facility, and access to her has not been allowed. Like, people who want to do interviews, people want to like come and like film her or do anything.
It makes me suspicious, honestly.
She's basically living a very, very private life. I think I sent you a picture of her, a little bit older. There is a picture of her from, I think it's the early 2000s. I'm pretty sure.
This?
No. There is a picture of her. It's maybe from the early 2000s, but she's older, and you can see what she looks like older. You can just search Jeannie Wiley now, and it's like the most updated picture that you can get from her. So there is somebody, like a reporter, who hired a private investigator and did it anonymously so that she could get information, and found out that Jeannie is doing fine. Jeannie's doing okay. She still knows sign language. She still communicates. She doesn't really speak, but she is okay. And is just living a very private life, and that the state is not allowing her to be, part of this public story anymore, right? Like, she gets her privacy now and gets to just be away from everybody and all of the fighting over her. And I just hope that she is now. I hope
she's
really
lived a long
happy
life at this
and
point,
enjoying her
so.
life. Yeah, she lived. Her dad didn't even think she was going to live till 12. She's like in her 70s now. She must be. Let me see.
No, she was born in 57, right?
Yeah, I don't know how long. I know she has to still be alive. It says that she is 64 or 65. So I just hope she's happy. She gets Tupperware and gets to rip all the pages out of all the books she wants to do.
Okay, maybe not that, but
she gets to Alistair. She gets anything.
Maybe
she wants
certain
in life.
kinds of books.
This story and Jeannie Wiley, just she has such like a good place in my heart that I think about her often, and I've thought about her often ever since high school, and I always try to check up on her and I call Jeannie. I ask how she's doing. I Google her sometimes and just to see if anything else, if there's any updates.
DM her on Facebook.
I'm very interested in what's happened to her, and I hope that she's very happy because I just love her. I feel love for her. Somebody I've never even met, and it's just like I see her face, and she just deserved the fucking world.
Someone who didn't
robbed.
deserve any of this and could have had a completely different life.
Absolutely, and just people just fought over her. They just wanted attention, and they wanted, I think the point of that research study was that she was supposed to, she was supposed to get more from them than they were supposed to get from her, right? And it seemed like the world took more from her than she was able to ever take from the world.
That's funny because that's exactly what they were supposed to do.
Yeah.
And as soon as she didn't show the progress that they needed her to show, they just gave up on her.
They dumped her and didn't get any better from there. But I'm holding out hope that Jeannie is a very happy person today. That is the case of Jeannie Wiley. So I hope it wasn't too sad, too traumatizing, and we will.
Way to start people out on a Monday, Zachary. Way to start people out on Monday.
Probably every Monday won't be this sad. But we hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. And we will see you guys Friday for the late show. A little bit more fun at the late show.
Yeah, positive energy. We did coffee today. We're going to be doing tequila on Friday.
Yeah, the late show. We're going to have the episode will be the podcast episode will be out on early in the morning, and then if you're watching this in video format, the video format will be released in the evening because kind of make it a real late show.
Yeah, that'll be
something
nice.
like that. I don't know.
And then if bring your beverage of choice.
Yeah,
if you want to.
We're having little cocktails,
Sip with us.
little sippers.
So how do we say goodbye now?
We're just saying bye.
Goodbye.
Letting the people go.
Adios, gentle listeners.